So thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our Digging Deeper webinar as we look at the rule change and considering an emotional behavioral disability as part of a comprehensive special education evaluation. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm Eva Shaw. I'm a consultant on the special education team at DPI. And with me today is Tim Pierenboom. He's the school psychology consultant on the student services prevention and wellness team at DPI. Due to the large number of participants, we are not able to take questions during this meeting. If you registered prior to November 8th, we took questions using a Google survey. If you registered after November 8th, or if you have additional questions, you can submit your questions on the Google survey found in the participant folder. We'll address the most common questions submitted to this survey during our time together today. Also, if you are in need of a sign language interpreter, please know that you can pin the sign language interpreter to the top of your screen. All right, so moving on, as your homework or your pre-work for this session, you should have reviewed at least one of the resources that we shared. These resources are posted to the Wisconsin DPI Emotional Disability webpage and the Professional Learning Event webpage. With the rule change resources and today's information, IEP teams will have the information they need to begin implementing the rule starting on December 1st, 2021. After our time together, we hope that participants will have a better understanding of why the rule was changed, the basics of a comprehensive special education evaluation, and how the new rule fits into that comprehensive special education evaluation, the assessment requirements for identifying an emotional behavioral disability, the definition of an emotional behavioral disability, and some additional considerations.
I'm going to go ahead and start with a little background on why the rule was changed and a little bit on how the rule was changed. So we've gotten some questions about why the December 1st effective date. Seems like it's coming really fast. So we wanted to address this right away since we're about 2 weeks out from that date. The short answer is that DPI does not necessarily control the process of the rulemaking process. And at various points in the process that you can see on this slide, things can be slowed down, things can be sort of delayed. And that's there to allow stakeholders and others to have input and things that ultimately make the rule better. Our goal was for an effective date this past summer, but obviously we missed that by a bit. So that said, we are confident that districts and IEP teams will be ready to implement this rule by December 1st with the materials that are already available on that first one of those earlier slides that Eva shared, and the information that we'll be going over today. So a brief history on emotional behavioral disabilities, or as it's referred to in IDEA, emotional disturbance. One of our main goals was to better align the rule with current trauma-sensitive practices, social emotional learning, mental health, positive behavior intervention and supports, all the best practices in those areas. So for some context, IDEA hasn't changed significantly since 1975. Our PI 11 rule in Wisconsin hasn't changed since 2000. So we know we've learned a lot since then. The original adverse childhood experiences study that initially drew our attention to the impact of childhood trauma was done in the mid-90s. The National PBIS Center was initially funded nationally in 1998. CASEL, the National Collaborative for Social Emotional Learning, was founded in 1994. So just in those areas, think about all the new things that we now know about those areas of trauma and social emotional learning and mental health and PBIS. So this rule better aligns with sort of current research and best practices in all those areas. Additional goals that we hope to accomplish with the rule was to remove as much ambiguity as possible in the rule for IEP teams to be able to make better data-based objective decisions. We wanted to ensure IEP teams look not only at the whole child when they're doing an evaluation, including their strengths, but also look at the ecological system around that student, because we know it's the things that go on around us impact our behaviors, and our behaviors impact the things that go on around us, and vice versa. Additionally, the change was made. There are some key things here in terms of we wanted the rule to address potential bias, both implicit and explicit biases. We wanted to ensure consistency and objectivity. We wanted IEP teams to have all the information they need at the evaluation meeting to make the right decisions and accurate identifications. Trauma-sensitive practices, we'll be talking about it a little bit throughout the day today. Those are infused throughout the rule. Some students with the right intervention supports might not need special education at all. And if they do, whether interventions were successful or not, including the evidence-based intervention practices in the rule, again, is best practice to support and meet student needs, and also provide IEP teams with the data they need when they move on to developing an IEP. And finally, placing an emphasis on educational equity and ecological factors. So we'll be talking quite a bit about norms and cultural backgrounds and cultural responsiveness as we talk throughout the day. And for those that have viewed the introductory webinar that introduced the rule, you've already seen this data and heard about it, but this is the last 10 years of data on the risk ratios of identification of emotional behavioral disability by race. Where that black arrow is on the left, risk ratio of 1 would be representation in some area being exactly proportionate to the proportion of the population. So that would mean if 70% of your school's population was white, that 70% of your emotional behavioral disability identifications would be white students. So that's proportionate. So as you can see from the chart, if you are Black or African American, if you are 2 or more races, or if you are Indigenous, you're at or near around twice as likely to be identified as having an emotional behavioral disability. So we have, in short, a significant disproportionality problem in our state. So the problem with this proportionality, or more importantly, the problem with inaccurate identifications, is we know students identified as emotional behavioral disability, they get less of the good stuff from school. They get less positive feedback. They receive less positive supports and interventions, and less positive interactions in the school. And they get way more of the bad stuff that kids can experience in school, such as suspensions, expulsions, seclusions and restraints, negative feedback from adults. They are more likely to be bullied. So then, not surprisingly, once they leave school, that pattern repeats. They get way less of the positive secondary and post-secondary outcomes, academic skills, graduation, jobs, college attendance, college graduation, and they experience way more of the negative post-secondary outcomes, dropouts, incarceration, poor physical and mental health outcomes. So I can't say it really any better than this, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it, that as the data continue to show, minority students with disabilities are at a greater risk for being suspended. School suspension increases the risk of school dropout, and school dropout increases the likelihood of incarceration. The pathway to incarceration seems to be evident for minority students, minority special needs students. But here's the key. It's not just about disproportionality. We're not saying if the student isn't white, they can't have an emotional behavioral disability or shouldn't be identified as such. The key here is accurate identifications. and accurately evaluating student strengths and needs. So on our comprehensive special education evaluation webpage, Dr. Markeda Newell writes that we must clearly understand the conditions under which the decision to identify a student as having a disability and providing special education services is inappropriate, not just for students of color, but for any students. So it's about accurate identification. And given the data discussed on the previous slide, we want to be sure that we're making accurate identifications and that we're doing comprehensive evaluations to identify what those students' needs are so that we can meet them.
Okay, so we're going to now just talk briefly about what a comprehensive special education evaluation all entails, and we'll also provide some additional resources on the last slide of this section, so you can learn more about the comprehensive special education evaluation. And it's always good to start with equity. It's good to remind ourselves that as educators, we must ground all of our work within an equity framework. Doing this ensures every student has access to the resources and educational rigor they need at the right moment in their education across race, gender, ethnicity, language, ability, sexual orientation, family background, and/or family income. Grounding all our work within an equity framework includes how we identify students with disabilities. A comprehensive special education evaluation exists within a district's equitable multi-level system of support. The stronger a school and district's equitable multi-level system of support is, the easier it will be to conduct a comprehensive special education evaluation, to accurately consider and identify a student's category of disability, as well as identify the student's developmental and educational needs. Achieving educational equity is built on the foundation of an equitable multi-level systems of support. At its core, the special education evaluation is a two-step process, not an event. It consists of procedures to determine if the child is a child with a disability or continues to be, and to determine the educational needs of the child. In conducting the evaluation, the IEP team must use assessment tools and strategies, as well as information provided by the parents to determine whether the child is a child with a disability and the content of the child's IEP, including information related to enabling the child to be involved in and progress in the general curriculum, or for preschool children to participate in appropriate activities. The quote on this slide comes directly from the federal regulations implementing the Individuals with Disability Education Act. IDEA regulations outline the requirements school and district staff must follow when conducting special education evaluations. This quote says, "In evaluating each child with a disability, the evaluation is sufficiently comprehensive to identify all of the child's special education and related service needs, whether or not commonly linked to the disability category in which the child has been classified." This means special education evaluations do not just result in labeling. They also provide student-specific information useful for educational decision-making. Wisconsin's, or any state's, disability category criteria are generally only part of what is used to determine eligibility for special education. Excuse me. Disability category criteria do not explicitly include all evaluation elements required by IDEA. In particular, documenting whether a student does or does not meet criteria for a particular disability category by itself does not provide sufficient information to identify the student's needs and strengths. Applying the eligibility criteria for a particular category of disability is not enough to answer the need for special education question. To answer this question, the team must be able to identify the individual student's academic and functional skill needs and the extent of those needs. Like Tim mentioned, Dr. Markeda Newell helped provide some information. The Wisconsin DPl developed a comprehensive special education evaluation framework, and a key component of that framework is the set of documents developed by her. Dr. Newell helped DPl develop a culturally responsive problem-solving guide for school teams supporting an equitable multi-level system of support. These resources assist IEP teams with recognizing different types of bias that may affect decision-making throughout the evaluation process. She also developed videos and self-guided modules on culturally responsive problem solving, which can be found on the Culturally Responsive webpage. Included on the resource page is a link to a talk that Dr. Newell gave to educators in MPS about culturally responsive problem solving, which really helped me think about and plan for potential bias that might come up during the decision-making process. Dr. Newell developed information specifically for IEP teams to identify and address bias as it may relate to the special education evaluation process. This is especially important when we consider the racial disproportionality in Wisconsin when identifying an emotional behavioral disability. We're going to work to get a balanced view of the whole child through a comprehensive special education evaluation. The better the picture the IEP team has of a student at the point of referral, the more efficient and effective the review of existing data will be. And the more efficient and effective the review of existing data is, the more focused the collection of additional data and other information during the evaluation to paint a culturally responsive picture of the whole child and to identify students' strengths to address challenges and barriers. Information about the whole child enriches IEP team discussions and helps stay focused on the student's educational needs, not just disability category. One of the major shifts in thinking about special education evaluations is a focus on identifying student needs versus primarily focusing on identifying whether a student meets criteria for a particular disability category. There's been a history of determining assessments to be administered based on the referral rather than a team approach in gathering information from a variety of sources and discussed collectively to decide next steps and what assessments can provide the additional information needed as part of that evaluation process. This approach to conducting special education evaluations is not only a better use of IEP team members' time and effort, but it provides more individualized and educationally relevant information to inform general and special education supports moving forward. Special education evaluation is a high-stakes decision and a time and resource-intense process. Thus, IEP teams should fully utilize the required evaluation timelines to get it right for the benefit of each student and family and for the other members of the student's IEP team. Getting a balanced view and moving from a labeled focus to needs-focused evaluation involves asking educationally relevant questions based on the referral and the review of existing data. Disability category criteria is only one type of question that needs to be answered. The IEP team can consider if the evaluation needs to answer any specific questions about the student's level of performance and functioning as it relates to academics, cognitive learning, communication, independence and self-determination, physical and health, or social and emotional learning. A comprehensive special education evaluation does not mean the IEP team will assess and collect information on everything or all of these areas. It means you plan your evaluation so that the IEP team will not miss anything about the student that may be needed to determine special education eligibility, and if the student is determined eligible, to develop the content of a student's individualized education program. For more information regarding a comprehensive special education evaluation, please visit our webpage.